I remember vividly when Konami's Contra was released for the NES. It was 1988 and the US was in love with Nintendo, lapping up anything released for their new platform. Contra had been an overnight success, pushing two-player running guns to the front as everyone's favorite genre. It was challenging, looked great, and had a memorable soundtrack that wasn't easily forgotten. When Sega's Genesis started to really take hold in the US, I just knew Konami would bless its owners with a Contra to call their own. They took their sweet time, however. Despite Konami releasing Genesis games as early as 1992, Contra didn't show up until the second half of 1994. Called Contra Hard Corps, it took the formula from its forebearers and gave Sega fans a unique entry that was challenging and quite a bit different from the stuff released elsewhere. In this episode, we'll be taking a look at that, talk a bit about its quality, and see if it's something you need to play. I hope you guys enjoy my review of Contra Hard Corps for the Sega Genesis. The gameplay of Contra Hard Corps stayed in line with the games you know so well. This is pure adrenaline-filled arcade run-and-gun action right here. You are typically dropped into a stage, bullets start flying, and it's your job to keep moving and not get killed. You have 4 characters to choose from this time. You get a choice of a male and female human, a werewolf with a machine gun for an arm, and a tiny robot called Brownie. These characters are not just for cosmetic variants either, they each actually have their own unique weapons. The variety here is quite stunning too. You get everything from spread shots to grenades to lasers to flamethrowers and everything in between. This is in addition to a grenade that you can carry that damages everything on the screen. While you're blasting away, you can also jump, grab onto walls and ceilings, and perhaps most importantly, slide. It allows you to avoid certain death by literally dodging bullets and physical harm. If timed correctly, this slide can get you out of just about any bad spot you've gotten yourself into. You also have 2 modes of shooting you can choose. Number 1 allows you to move and shoot at the same time, while number 2 locks you into place so you can be deadly accurate. Much of what you'll encounter here is more akin to something you'd play in a treasure game than in the previous Contra outings. Stages are typically short and heavily reliant on a brutal boss encounter that usually has multiple forms to survive. That's where the game's difficulty comes into play. Trial and error is the order of the day. You need to replay many of these battles numerous times to understand the timing and attack patterns. Once a stage or boss is fought well enough to move on to the next, you'll likely get wrecked all over again. But Konami wasn't content with just letting you face the same old stages over and over. They actually created a story around Contra this time that allows you to choose your own path. At certain times throughout the game, you'll get a choice of how to proceed. This brings about branching paths and ultimately a chance at different endings. Never had Konami given Contra so many weapons, so much choice, and the results were truly impressive. Contra was always a good-looking series of games. When it came to the Genesis, it took advantage of the things you'd expect it to. Great backgrounds, lots of stuff on the screen, huge multi-jointed sprites, and it all ran without a hitch. There's also a fair bit of cool special effects for you to enjoy. Sometimes you get some areas that quickly change the perspective on you, such as twisting and turning the screen, or having the action come right at you. Even in the normal side-scrolling segments, backgrounds typically have something special going on as well. Sometimes you get some great parallax scrolling, sometimes enemies that will charge forward into the foreground, and sometimes you get some pretty damn convincing sprite rotation. It all makes for one great looking and running game and a showpiece that was every bit as impressive as the best on the system. Konami had usually done right by Sega and their 16-bit workhorse, and Contra may very well be their finest work. I was usually a fan of the music Konami produced. Hell, on the Genesis, I consider Hyperstone Heist and Bloodlines two of the finest soundtracks on the entire platform. But the stuff here just didn't come off well to me. Don't get me wrong, some of it is decent, but none of it meets the epic nature of the visuals and gameplay. I know some of you love it, but in the grand scheme of FM goodness, this one just didn't connect with me. I have chosen a few samples so you can reach your own conclusions. Like many games that generation, Contra Hardcore varied greatly region to region. First, it was called something different in the US, Europe, and Japan. In the US, it was of course called Contra Hardcore. In Japan, it was slightly different as Contra the Hardcore. And finally, Europe saw the biggest title change as it was now called PROBOTECTOR. There were numerous content changes as well. The US version followed the series' typical one-hit death design. Take a bullet or physically get hit by an enemy and you lost a life. The European version was the same way. This was not the case of the Japanese version, however. You actually had hit points in this one. Each life was able to take 3 hits before you died, with each hit giving you a short period of invincibility. This made for a much easier game, though it still will be challenging to most people. The US and European versions also had limited continues, while the Japanese version has as many as you need to keep playing. This again equals an easier time. Finally, there was a massive cosmetic change in the European version. In order to appease censors and do away with any form of human violence, every playable character was made into a robot. Pretty much the entire game is now robot-on-robot violence, which is apparently preferable to other forms of violence. The European version also has support for multiple languages in the options menu. Right from the beginning, Contra throws you straight into the action. No joke, you come crashing in and are immediately tossed into the fire. From there you have one of the very best run and guns on the platform. It's hard but never unfair. There is always a place on the screen to avoid damage, a weapon to use that makes quicker work of your foe, and a strategy for you to learn. The story that allows you to mix things up a bit only heightens the experience, as does the excellent visual presentation. Simply put, it's a heck of a well-made game that has enough replayability to last most people weeks and even months worth of playtime. It's not without its weaknesses, however. The stages are really short and prizes challenge over enemy variety. You typically will mow down only a handful of grunts before you're taking on a more powerful foe. This has its appeal, but I still often found myself wishing that the stages were just a tad longer and more varied. It often felt very similar to a boss rush mode, kinda in the way Alien Soldier is presented. As I pointed out earlier, I was also not a big fan of the music. It's important I make it clear that I don't hate it, but I just feel it doesn't do the rest of the game justice. These small criticisms pale next to its positives, however. Contra Hardcore does the genre and system proud. You'll be hard-pressed to find its equal. While Konami had a few misfires on the Genesis, they also produced some great original content you couldn't play anywhere else at the time. Contra Hard Corps was in the latter group and one hell of a memorable experience. Not only was it one of the better running guns on the platform, but it easily held its own against Contra 3. Instead of trying to copy that game's formula verbatim, Konami chose to stir things up a bit and give Sega fans something a bit different. That really is a part of the big appeal of this one. It presents multiple playable characters with their own set of weaponry. The story has choice and changes how the levels are played, there are different endings, and it takes the simple premise of previous games and really adds a ton of extra reasons to enjoy it. Konami also chose to give us some pretty excellent graphics. Lots of cool looking scrolling and sprite effects are everywhere throughout the adventure, and while I didn't care very much for the music, I would never call it bad. I really do miss these kinds of games. One pops up every so often that reminds me of how good they used to be, but rarely are as well designed and as fun to play. Contra Hard Corps is a classic in that regard, a game that sits atop the genre as a shining example of how it should be done. It ain't perfect, but it also isn't far from it. If you find yourself having a hard time with it, track down the Japanese version. It's more forgiving and gives you unlimited continues. There's also a fan hack of the US version that puts the hit points back in. That one may be preferable if you want to understand the story and choices you have to fully enjoy it. No matter which way you go, this is one Contra you won't regret playing. Sega fans rarely had a third-party game given this much TLC compared to its Nintendo counterparts, and it's a great companion piece to Castlevania Bloodlines. Don't let the challenge scare you away. Score the right version and you'll still have a blast whether you're a run-and-gun savant or not. Contra Hard Corps is an absolute must-play for the Sega Genesis. I'm Sega Lord X. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.